Hello, and welcome to Philosophy Fools, a bi-weekly podcast where a young father and old bachelor talk about life, philosophy, and staying curious. This week, nephew Josh and Uncle Greg prepare to tackle Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. We'll explore why Meditations is more like Instagram than a book, some strategies for making reading easier, and cover some basic background on Stoicism and what it means to be a Stoic. Hope that sounds good, because that's what we're doing.
Hi, I'm Josh.
Hi, I'm Uncle Greg, and we are the Philosophy Fools.
All right, guys, just a quick reminder on why we do this podcast. We are here to explore philosophy just as normal people, as philosophy fools. We try to relate our findings and thoughts to our real lives and see if we can get any practical use out of it. The philosophers of old and new have a lot to teach us, and we hope our conversations here may give you some insight into your own lives. All right, Uncle Greg, we're starting a new discussion today that I am excited about, but also a little nervous about, and we will discuss that. We are starting Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, which is very different from On the Shortness of Life.
That's right, Josh. We spent the last 4 weeks discussing Seneca's On the Shortness of Life, which is a little easier to digest than something like the Meditations, and it's mostly because Seneca gives you a real clear structure. It's written like a letter, and it walks you through his points. He as the writer is taking on the job of walking you through his thoughts, whereas here with Meditations, it really is very different. It's Marcus Aurelius is it's just like a grab bag of thoughts that aren't written down in any kind of particular order, so each individual object needs to be kind of taken on its own, and then you move on to the next. But so when I was looking at it, I kept thinking, like, this is a lot more like reading like an Instagram post or a Facebook post than it is like reading a book, because in the same way that in social media, one day you're talking about your cat and the next day you're talking about your day at work. So these are all just kind of different ways of getting to the same place, but it makes it a lot more complicated to make sense of.
Yeah, it was certainly pretty difficult for me to understand in two ways, because I generally listen to this on an audiobook.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm listening to it, it was tough for me to keep noticing what was going on, because it switched from different subject to different subject. So like I would listen to one thing and then I would kind of understand it, and then it would literally just go to a completely different subject. And my tendency in audiobooks is if I'm not interested in the subject, or if it's not going on the same thing, then I'll get distracted by something else, and so I might miss a sentence or miss two sentences and have to go over it. So with this book, it was actually better for me to go back and actually read it instead of listen to it. So I reread book one just from one of the texts online, so that helped me a lot. So how do you think we're gonna make sense of all this for the podcast?
Well, I think that just what you're talking about right there is exactly the challenge we have to for ourselves and for our listeners to try and get past, which is this doesn't flow. This doesn't have a sense of beginning, middle, and end. And particularly if you're using something like an audiobook, your brain is wired to let the story be told. And when the thing that's being told to you is not a story and is in fact just separate, discrete concepts, then your brain just it's trying to make connections. It's trying to go oh wait, he was talking about his grandmother, now he's talking about his uncle. And this is just a person talking to themselves. So it reflects a lot more like the inside of somebody's head than it does a story. So after we've had some conversations about this, one of the things that I thought would be helpful are basically two things. One is to just try and get into the head of Marcus Aurelius, or just the idea of like the person who's a Stoic philosopher, or somebody who's living by the precepts of Stoicism. And so I think if we do a little bit of background work on just what does a Stoic believe, that might help us be a Stoic while we read it. But also, I was sort of digging around to try and find some kind of context, because usually it's the author's job. Like, we make the assumption that it's the job of the author to make all this stuff make sense. Like, it's like, why are you making me do all the work? But again, this is very much like a diary, so it's not really a book. So the author doesn't have a sense of himself as an author. So what I thought was, hey, first of all, there's got to be a different way, or some organized way for us to put our thoughts down.
Right.
And so I went out on the internet and found a couple of things that helped trigger my thinking on this, and we'll get into that in a minute. But to get started, I think we can just do a quick walkthrough some of the background information on being a Stoic. And I found that in my I'm reading the Penguin Classics version of this out of the hard copy, and it's got a really good introduction by the translator and the editor that goes over these little concepts of Stoicism. And I found it really helped me a lot. So I thought this would be something we can go through and just talk about the background of Stoicism.
Awesome. That sounds good to me, because I do listen to a lot of different Stoics, but I guess I don't really have a good understanding of the background of Stoicism. So this will also help me.
Well, good. And so the first thing that sort of jumped out at me, that I guess I kind of knew this, but it never really was clear, was that in ancient Rome, religion in modern day, like in our modern times, we think of religion as the place where people think about their personal morality, their relationship to the universe, and all that kind of stuff. And in ancient Rome, religion was not that. It was a state-run ritual bureaucracy, meaning that it was in the business of doing rituals to the gods, essentially to keep, at minimum, to not make them angry, and at best to get them on the side of the city or the side of the people. But these ideas of thinking about, the self and the good life and man's relationship to the gods, all of that fell to the philosophers. So that when we're reading a Stoic, we're reading somebody who, in the modern context, is grappling with all the stuff that we would think that a religious shaman or something would do. Whereas in their time, that concept of religion was separated a bit. So the relationship to the gods was all about ritual, and all this business about how do we think was pretty much placed on the philosopher.
Now, in ancient Rome, did they get together and have philosophy meetings?
As I understand it, yes. And I haven't done a lot of research on that, but there was a great tradition of the philosopher and the students. And so, like, the philosopher would just be surrounded by his students and just spout off about philosophy. It's the this is terrible. Old man brain not working. The two-way dialogues are, what do we call that? Socratic, the Socratic method of people asking questions and the teacher speaking back, instead of the linear thing of a person standing in front of somebody and just saying what they have to say and walking away.
Okay.
The Socratic method is the idea of question and answer. But yes, to your question, that it absolutely was a thing where people learned philosophy at the knee of a tutor or a teacher of some kind.
So it was definitely super important back then, and a big part of the Roman life.
I believe, and this is something that I am super not clear on, so I'm just throwing this out there. I don't think it was like, if you were a shepherd or a farmer, like that wasn't part of your life. I think that this was definitely an artifact of city living and probably of wealth or at minimum like good family standing. Because the one thing that I haven't run across, because that's a negative deduction, because the only people I ever read about doing this stuff tend to be the royal class or the upper class of the cities.
Right, because Marcus Aurelius wasn't he was a ruler, and
Yeah.
Seneca was some kind of ruler, or at least wasn't he a politician, or he was at least rich at some
Well,
point. So
no, I think if I've got this right, I think Seneca is just it's not just, but Seneca represents one of these tutor types, which
yeah,
is, he was a teacher and a philosopher, but they tended not to, like a big part of being a good Stoic is that you don't want to have wealth.
right,
And so I don't know. I'm talking out of my ass. I believe these terms that I should be using. And so, and very much like the theme of this podcast, which is this is just to try and come up with ways to take philosophy and put it into our daily life, that there's a lot to be learned about who was doing these practices and how did this relate to the different people, because just like you said, like friggin' Marcus Aurelius is the emperor of
right,
Rome. He's not some schlub, and but at the same time, he would be a person who valued a good teacher like Seneca.
right,
And so I think that it's interesting when you start to realize this distinction of religion versus philosophy in the ancient context, whereas you would, like in a modern context where you have people who will gather in groups and talk about religion, that same energy is what you were getting in the ancient world when people would gather to talk about philosophy, because again, that the religion didn't take on that kind of personal statement. Like you may have a personal relationship with the gods, but it
right,
was really clear that the state religion's job was to keep the state protected.
right, right.
So there's that, and the next thing was that, and I found this very interesting, the idea that the Stoics defined philosophy as striving after wisdom, with wisdom being the knowledge of things divine and human. And this is something that comes up in the text of meditations. And I have a good intuition of what they mean by nature, but they interchangeably use the term nature and the term natural life. And that's all around this idea that we're born into a context, and in this case, the context that the Stoics divided into three branches, which is logic, physics, and ethics. And as I understand it, like logic is essentially thinking. It's like how do you think well, and that comes first because it's your logic that does the interrogation or the exploration of physics, which is anything is like the natural world that you engage, like that, like anything. Wait, I think I've got this idea of impressions, which is produced by the impact of things or qualities on the senses. And so physics is sort of creating impressions that your logic has to interpret. And that's why you have to, and that they put them in that order, that your job is to sort of learn good thinking and then interrogate the universe. And then with ethics, I think it's like how well do you interpret the universe? Like the physics part is the observation part, and then the ethics part is the interpretation part.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
and I would say so. I mean, yeah, it's like coming up with an idea and how to apply it, and then if it's right or wrong. I mean, yeah, that's kind of how I would see that.
Yeah, and I think that, but from the perspective of us as people reading the Stoics and sort of like tackling the book Meditations,
Mm-hmm.
it's just really important to realize that a lot of what you're reading is that progression. It's sort of thinking applied to a thing, and then the analysis of that thing.
Right, right.
And so and I think that that's where you get a lot of the language can get a little chunky because he's kind of exploring things in all these qualities. And let's see, what else we got here? Let's see, knowledge begins with impressions. Okay. Yeah. So, and I'm sorry, and this was the statement that came from the forward, which is that that knowledge begins with impressions, is produced by the impact of things or qualities on the senses. It is then in the power of the mind to pass judgment on what the senses report. You either agree or that it's true, or you reject it. And so that process is just present in all of these. It's like when you look at a subject of morality, it's kind of like, I saw a man beating someone. And then you go like, well, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And then you sort of work your way through the steps of sort of being a person who's ready to think, and then is hit with a stimulus and then comes to a response.
Right, exactly. I really like this sentence. I mean, it's like almost the definition of mindfulness or something like that. It's basically like getting into a situation and then instantly being able to go through all your filters in your mind and basically make a decision or pass judgment, as it says. Yeah, I definitely like. I mean, I feel like that's the super important thing in all different ways of education. I mean, including the Stoics.
Well, I think one of the things that while I was reading this that just kept jumping at me was how not like most people this is. That the common, and I'm thinking about from the context of like if you read like all this crazy stuff on Twitter or social media, people tend to jump to the last step and they skip over the first two steps. Like all they're doing is reacting to this ethical argument one way or the other. And ethics makes it sound a little bit too broad. And when you think about something like QAnon and people being like, well, I know that you are a baby eating pedophile who is trying to eat the adrenochrome of babies. So anything you say is immediately suspect.
Right.
So in that sentence, there is a clear absence of the logic part and the physics part, because you don't have actual real proof that you're reacting to, and nor is your thought process particularly well thought out, because you wouldn't be able to wind up at the conclusion phase if you had done any of the work of the logic and the physics part.
Oh, very interesting.
And it's just but nothing new. People love to do that. They love to become, and again, I'm not trying to like disrespect religion, but it's one of the easiest examples that you can use of this, which is without any interrogation, you accept that your position is the moral position. And then by definition, anything that isn't that position is an immoral position. And so if somebody's talking to you and like they are, like you're a Christian and they are a Jew, that you have this immediate dynamic that leaves out the thinking part and the sort of physics part, and only deals in the ethic part. And it makes it extremely difficult to have any kind of relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. So if going back to the sentence that we're talking about, I mean, so that's almost like keeping an impression forever.
Yeah.
Like, so if so, I mean, as soon as you're put into the bucket of your own religion, and then you're only thinking like that, you have that impression in your mind, and then everything that passes through that thought is going to automatically be judged by that individual impression. Instead, it should be put through. It's almost like a checks and balances, like going put through the logic, the physics, and then the ethics, and then of every single time, instead of just almost skipping over the logic and the physics because you've already placed your religion into a certain ethics bucket, I would say.
And I don't want to get like word policey here, but my gut instinct is that the impressions lie in the physics realm. Like they are things that are causing you to have stimulus. So it's not having the knowledge of I am a Christian or I am a Jew. It's you walking down the street and seeing a person perhaps in religious garb, and you that, like, that's the impression part. Or somebody who says to you, my God is the one true God. And that's like, so that's the impression part happening that your thinking has to interact with.
And then
But,
you have to filter into the ethics.
right. Whereas the idea of people operating exclusively from ethics, if you think about it, if you're raised in any tradition, if you're raised, and let's keep it on the context of religion, if you're raised as a Christian, those are your parents. Those are essentially your gods are telling you what is truth. And so there's no, like, you aren't thinking about that. That's just, you're just being brought up in a space. So by the time you reach an age of thinking, it is your ethics. Your ethics already exist without you ever thinking or really dealing with the stimulant.
And I bet nobody ever goes back to the point of rethinking a lot of those things.
Well, and I think that for me, the part of this that's important, the reason that I like discussing this with you and I like discussing this in general, is that if everything's great, if your life is completely free of stress, anxiety, and fear, if you're just cruising through life and everything is awesome and you don't spend a dark moment in your life, then don't worry about philosophy. Don't worry about thinking. Great. Just keep living life. That things like philosophy are really good tools to understand why you might experience stress, anxiety, and fear in your day-to-day life. And particularly when you sort of step back and like, wait a second, this anxiety doesn't seem to be logical. And so you get mad at yourself for having the anxiety, and it sort of creates a spiral of sort of internal emotions, because there isn't, if you don't have a good tool set, a toolkit to walk through this stuff, everything can seem really overwhelming and like impossible to surmount. So all this stuff that we talk about, mindfulness, like the Buddhist philosophies, the Stoic philosophy, they are all handbooks for dealing with reality.
Certainly. And using these handbooks, I mean, can definitely, like, it, because you have the same issues no matter what. And then just bringing in these tools, I mean, can really use the same negatives. If you didn't have those proper tools, then you just throw those into that tool set. And then all of a sudden, all those negatives like are really your fuel or the positivity that you need to go to the next point in life, or whatever you're using philosophy or anything for, really.
Well, and here you've got the next a comment that was made in this introduction was, the chief end of man, his highest good, is happiness. Happiness is attained by living in accordance with nature. For man, the essential principle is reason. Embedded in that statement is the idea that tends to dog most people, which is this, that they've got an idea of what nature is, and nature is this place in which there is physics, and then there is you as the thinker, and then there's your conclusions, and that all the little pieces and parts of this are things like things you control, things you don't control, because you tackle those two things differently, because one you control and one you do not control. But if you are living in a world where you don't have any of that kind of organized thinking, then everything is either, like, you can imagine that everything's in your control, or you can imagine nothing is in your control. And once you're in that headspace, your brain will try to prove that to you. And it's the reason that that so many people get so lost, is that, if you really think about it, if you really think that you control everything, or that you control nothing, that it's going to cause like this continuous sense of like disappointment or frustration. Whereas if you just have those two simple ideas in your head, the idea that there are things you control and things you don't control, then when you get struck by the stimulus, or in this case the physics, and that can be something as horrible as like losing a loved one, like that's a thing you can't control. But if you thought you could, or if you don't understand the idea of things that you don't control, then that can just be overwhelming permanently. It could change your whole sense of reality.
Right. Like if you say like the death of a family member, you blame it on yourself. I mean, that could ruin the rest of your life.
Absolutely, because it's a permanent state, like because you are always guilty or you are always whatever, and it's something where this is where like the Stoics and I think any good life discipline is trying to get at, which is, there's stuff that there's relationships, and this kind of leads into the next step, which are sort of the buckets or the ideas that we can, as we read through meditations, we can place thoughts into these different buckets.
Right.
The part that I don't want to get, I don't want to try and give the impression that somehow these are magical buckets, that like it's the only way you can think of reading this stuff. It was really just me finding a great website, which is slow.co. So that's SLOWW.co. And it's just a guy named, I think his name's Kowalski, and he did an analysis of meditations. But since he was doing the whole book, I think he had like 25 characteristics. And when I saw that, I was like, well, that's a lot. 25 is a lot. And so I as I was reading through it, I was thinking, well, these kind of break into personal relationships for us, which is like that each of these ideas falls into some form of relationship. And so the ones I came up with, meaning that like, as you read the text, you can sort of like think about how this would fit into these various relationships. And the relationships that I came up with was like the relationship between you and yourself. So like we have this kind of continuous internal, like us talking to us. There's the relationship between you and other people, or just the outside world. It's the relationship between you and the external. Then there's this idea of things that you control, like how do you address things that you control? But then there's also the idea of your relationship to things you don't control. Right. And then also the relationship between you and time, because I don't know that that's really going to be a big bucket, but it's an important thing. It's that idea of like we have an expiration date, and that if we act like we don't, it's problematic.
Right.
And then
okay. While you're going through these, I just want to let you know one thing that I was thinking about is I know you said these aren't magical buckets and whatnot. So like when I'm going through this, and when our listeners are going through this and trying to figure out maybe what parts to put into what bucket, like certain sentences or certain statements can go into multiple buckets, probably, right? And
100%.
And we don't really want to like worry about it too much. This is just kind of like a way for us to think about it and don't get too caught up into anything like really strict or anything.
That's a really, really good point, because that is because the intention isn't to limit. It's the idea is just like, look, I'm telling you, you read the first like 2 pages of book 1 of meditations, and depending on where your head's at, you can just spin off into your brain's just like going, what is this guy talking about? and so the idea of bucketing this stuff is more just to put your mind at ease, that if you wanted to, you might just be able to like put them into each bucket and kind of think about them and from each of those contexts. The intention isn't to limit you. The intention is to try and to say like, hey, look, it's hard enough to read this stuff. When it comes down to brass tacks, the reason we're interested in, meaning you and I, about walking through these philosophy texts is to see if there's things we can use in our day-to-day lives. And these buckets are things that when I looked at them, I was like, well, you know what, you can use all this stuff in your day-to-day life. And so that's where it's sort of being able to relate Aurelius on his own level, because he's, in no way I'm trying to think like I can think like Marcus Aurelius. It's more that I'm really just trying to say like, hey, he went through a lot of trouble for himself and to really look at life in a very systematic way. But as he's writing it, he already knows his structure in his own brain. And it's the reason that it doesn't communicate that well off of the page, because he's really writing to himself.
Yeah, it's awesome. I feel like I want to write the same book for the rest of my life. And then just when I'm 70 years old, see what comes out of it. See how many pages I have.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, it's cool.
and the reason this could be so, like, if you can imagine, if you didn't have any kind of framework at all, how crazy your writings would be, in the sense of, like, you just be writing down, like, today I thought I was going to die and it really freaked me out. And it doesn't have any kind of, it's all it is I was afraid, essentially. And here, if it, like somebody like Aurelius would say, like, oh, if you're going to write that same sentiment, you would want to be like, I had this impression that I was going to die. Right. And I interrogated that impression. Like, what does it mean to die? And then I came to this conclusion of, was it false that I was going to die? And then you go, like, well, it's always true that you're going to die anyway. So in these moments of fear, what does that mean? It's an organized way to think about the craziest stuff that goes in and out of our head.
Yeah. Okay.
So there we go. So where are we at time wise? We've been talking.
Yeah. Well, let's just so we did the first 5, and we'll just do the last 6 point. I think I interrupted you before you said it, and that was you and thinking was the 6th point, or the 6th bucket that we're going to use in breaking up meditation.
So yeah, just a quick recap. So the buckets we created were the relationship between you and you, the relationship between you and others, the relationship to things you control, your relationship to things you don't control, your relationship between you and time, and the relationship between you and your own thinking. So those will be our buckets. And maybe they won't stand up to the rigors of our reading, but it gives us a place to start.
Cool. And then so we're going to do book 1, and then we'll try and do all those 6 buckets in one episode. And then maybe if we have to do it to a second episode, we'll do that. And then we'll just go through the books. I mean, that sounds awesome, like a good deal for the next few episodes.
Now, one thing that that I want to make sure that we make clear, because we talked about this before we started to record, and I think this is really important for everybody listening too. We're going to give ourselves, like, our job isn't to one for one take each idea and place it into a bucket. It is not, like, our intention here is not a book report or to come up with something at the end. What we want to do is find things that mean something to us, that stick out to us, things that have this kind of philosophical meaning to us, and then we'll put them into a bucket. And so we could potentially get through an entire book and just find nothing of interest. So I want our readers to have that same flexibility and freedom, that this isn't a job to be done. This is an exploration of the meditations of Marcus Aurelius, and some things will strike you as being really meaningful and some things will not.
And I love doing like this little kind of practice with you, because I think we're going to have, we're going to see different things as we read the book, and that's really cool. And that's what I'm looking forward to and excited about for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Same thing here. But certainly this is something where that as you and I just started to get into it, it became super clear that this wasn't a thing where we could just pick it up and start going. Like, we really had to do a little prep work here to make this a really good and fruitful exercise. Yeah,
absolutely. Which you did most of the prep work, which I appreciate.
Hey, I currently am an unemployed person and I have no children. So I am absolutely, I've got a lot of time, and I really want you to get something out of this process.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I really feel like I do. And I am super busy. I mean, I hate that excuse, but it's crazy with 2 kids. It's just like anytime that you think you're going to have time for yourself is basically time that you have to give to a kid, because those kids are completely dependent on you. It's crazy.
But one of the things that I think we'll find, because here you and I have just made a commitment to each other that we will get together 1 hour a week or 1 hour every other week. And that may be enough. It's better than nothing. And it plugs things into your brain that as those moment to moment things come up where you're like, good God, I have no time to even breathe, that you already are sticking into your brain the realization that every moment is a good time to sort of meditate on what's going on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I guess we're jumping into our our ending of our podcast here where we talk about our family. And so like last week, so I talked a little bit about the two kids, but last week I had a good friend of mine and his wife and his two kids stay over, which Kurt and Evelyn and his kid and their kids who
No,
are
I don't mean to interrupt, but this is Kurt's birthday week, right? So how old is Kurt?
oh oh man
I think it's
40, no,
37.
he's like 37, I
I
think.
think it's 37. Because
37.
I throw that out there just so people understand that we are, again, this is a multi-generational podcast. I'm
Yeah,
59, you're 36, right?
I will be 35 this
Okay.
year, so I'm 34 right now.
Oh, see, there you go. So you're a youngster. So that is, yeah. So I just want to throw that out there. So Kurt and his lovely wife, Evelyn, have got two kids and they came to visit this week.
Yeah, so a 2-year old and a 5-year old, and I have a 1-year old and a 4-year old. And so it was very interesting because obviously it's been COVID for so long, and so both of my kids haven't had a ton of interactions with other little kids. They have, I mean, for sure around the neighborhood, especially recently, but this is their first sleepover.
Right.
And so and that's a big deal. And so but both of the kids, the 5-year old and the 4-year old who were sleeping in the same room or whatever, they were acting the same. You know, they didn't want to sleep in the same room together. They were both getting up, and so it was basically like 2 nights of them not sleeping, even though they got along all the other times. It's just like they didn't like sleeping like that, I felt like. So I don't know. It's just it's interesting watching kids and how they interact with other kids. So that was last week, and so you can imagine there was no quiet time for a whole entire weekend, but it was really fun.
Oh, great, great. And I had, now, as boring as this may sound, I have, Josh, you know how much emphasis I place on this idea of having personal goals, like real formal goals, which sort of move from point A to point B and sort of deal with just sort of fundamentals of life. During COVID, I was super bad. Like in the moment that it would be the easiest to create formal goals was when I became like the donut eating monster of all time. And but now that as we're sort of drifting back out, I've set up just to get myself back in the habit of having weekly goals. I've gotten back into this idea of having a weight loss goal, an exercise goal, and for me, the most important, because I've fallen out of the habit, it's a time management goal. So that when I wake up in the morning, I know what I'm doing from beginning to the end. And that's a tough transition. And I like to encourage people to try these things, not because you will immediately succeed, but because it pushes you a little bit to think about things like how do you manage time. And at minimum, that awareness can be very helpful to realize of how much time you take advantage of and how much time gets wasted.
Do you think that just sticking to a rigorous schedule like that is just a better tool, kind of like you're saying, at like to test? Because I I I could see that as a productivity tool, it would be really good, but I just don't think that it's like super realistic almost to keep that. So do you think it's just a good practice to realize your time and how much time you're actually wasting to, and then you can kind of go back into a normal, a little bit looser schedule after that, and that makes more sense to your life?
The intention of it is something that you and I have talked about before, and I think we talked about it on the podcast. It's the idea of being able to actually have an effective hierarchy in your life of like the most important thing and the second most important thing, the third most important thing. Is that when you don't have a clear idea, here's where people get into trouble. They don't have a clear idea of how much time is available to them. And so they start thinking that they have all kinds of time or never enough time. So both of those things can be totally untrue. And you don't know until you really sit down and look at it. Because to your point, if you look down and you go like, oh, wait a second. I literally only have 4 hours in theory of free time during the week. I certainly shouldn't be grinding on myself because I haven't written a novel, right? Because that's a different, but it allows you as a person to say like, I've interrogated this. I've already committed this amount of my life there isn't room for the rest of it. So that means I can defer that goal for later when I do have that time.
Oh, that's very good. Like going back to a little bit of Seneca there. I mean, yeah, I guess that makes sense. I mean, just putting, trying to figure out when you want to do certain things. I mean, I guess that would make sense. And going back to the hierarchy. So yeah, I can see how all that makes sense.
Right. So,
Yeah.
of course, yeah, because I don't want to make it sound like this is just a generic sense of like, oh, I'm just going to schedule my time. It's more an idea of being able to look at a grid of my week and see what's already gone. So, like sleep is an example of something that time's already off the list, and then I can go and say like this time that you and I share, it's off the list. I have a little block that's it's already blocked off, so that when I look at the day, this, and I have a call that comes after our talk today, that time's just gone. So that means that there's already 4 hours of my time that's blocked off. So I can't think like, oh, I could spend the whole day doing something, because I can't. I've already committed time to something else.
Right. And I guess if you're somebody who thinks of a lot of different ideas and like you want to do a lot of different things, I guess this is what I was trying to say earlier. Like if I want to do say 10 different things and I really want to do them and I always think about them, but then if I actually write it down like on a schedule, I realize, oh, well, I can like literally physically only do 5 out of those 10 things. Then I don't need to really stress or be anxious about those other 5 because I literally can't do those right now, and there's no chance. So then I could just get rid of any anxiety around those activities.
Right. That continuous hamster wheel sense that you aren't getting anything done, and that's not true. You tend to be getting a lot of things done. So yeah, so for me, that's what time management is. It's not a magical sort of like tool that magically turns you into like this efficiency machine. What
Right.
it is to say like, hey, if you are a person that has well, it's interesting. There's 2 things you can be. You can be a person who's overly ambitious, and you can be a person who is way not ambitious enough, in the sense that if you just spend half of your day watching TV aimlessly and not engaging with the rest of the universe, and then you roll over and go like, oh, I should be exercising or something. Like that's the kind of thing you're trying to get away from, which is, hey, if you want to exercise, like me, now I have a daily exercise routine that it takes 2.5 hours out of the day. Those are gone. They are
Man,
not.
what's your daily exercise routine if it's
Well,
2.5 hours?
well, I mean, because you have to remember, like travel is a part of this. So it takes me
Okay.
around between 15 and 20 minutes to get to and from the gym. So that's already 40 minutes there.
Okay.
And that's walking. So that's part of my activity. But then it's just it's a fairly limited weight resistance and aerobic exercise. And when I say limited, it's around 4 exercises and 4 sets per exercise.
Awesome.
So it's over the 5 days. It's the whole body, but but it makes it so I don't, because I was finding that first of all, I'm older now, so spending 2 hours on my chest is kind of silly. So, and also I'm just finding that there's a certain threshold of how much output I can do, and so I found this routine that is, it's like I said, super simple, around 4 exercises a day, 4 sets per exercise.
That's awesome. I've been doing a little bit of a minimalist routine myself. Actually, over the past year, I think I've already talked about it on the podcast or whatever. But specifically, so I only do maybe two resistance exercises and 1 mobility exercise, and I do 1 session in the morning and then 1 session in the afternoon. Each one of those sessions are only about 10 minutes. So that's 4 resistance exercises and 2 mobility exercises a day. And then I usually have a planned walk with the family at night. And I've been doing that for a while. And then a week ago, I added in a 1.5 mile walk run routine.
Hmm.
Because in 90 days, well, 90 days from when I started, I'm turning 35, and I was like, all right, I haven't ran in like 3 years.
Yeah.
So that was one of my goals, was to run. So I added that in. But the minimalist routine, they're doing a lot of studies on resistance training and how you don't really need that much. If you're just trying to maintain a normal, healthy body,
Hmm.
I mean, nothing crazy like a bodybuilder or anything like that,
Right.
but I mean, all you need is the four movement patterns done once a week, or a few times a week, just depending on who you are, and
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I don't want to drag this out, but it brings up an interesting point, which is this idea of, I think I've discussed this before, that on any given thing, we're kind of like along a continuum of like one extreme to the other extreme. So when we talk about things like exercise, we are always going to be somewhere in the spectrum of world-class athlete who just all they do is think about exercise, to the most sedentary person on the planet, and that we as people are always sliding up and down between those 2 points. And it's just really important. That's why having goals is so important, is it gives us a chance to put some kind of context on why do even minimal exercise. Like that's where we need to be able to always have a context for ourselves of why do we do the things we do.
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true.
So
Did you
that's
watch Loki this week?
I did watch Loki, and I was stoked by that. That was a very I was surprised at how much I liked it.
Yeah, it was cool. I really liked it. I watched it last night so that we could have a little chat about it today.
Yeah, it was just something that, whereas you've got, we both went through Scarlet Witch and Falcon and Winter Soldier, right?
No, I have not watched all those yet.
Oh, you haven't? Okay. Well,
No.
so, and certainly you don't have to. One of the things, that the reason that I sort of pay a lot of attention to this is I just tend to pay a lot of attention to popular culture and the things that people are actively consuming and things that people ignore. And so when I see things like the Marvel Universe, it's really interesting to me because so many people are attracted to it, and it is by no means a single kind of entertainment. It does all kinds of things. So this one I liked a lot because they seem to be putting a lot of emphasis on just the chemistry between Tom Hiddleston and Owen Wilson.
Oh yeah.
So it becomes just kind of like I'm interested in these two guys, so that's why I'm going to be coming back for more.
Yeah, I thought Owen Wilson's character was pretty cool. And yeah, Loki is a fun character, and because he is like a good guy and a bad guy. And yeah, I think this has potential for sure.
And in a really short span of time, they've taken everything we know about the cinematic universe. So all the films that took you from Iron Man through to Endgame. Which one was the last one?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Endgame.
So Infinity War, then Endgame. Right. So that whole period represents a certain kind of reality, and in the span of 5 minutes in Loki, they've completely changed the dynamics of what that reality was. I mean,
Yeah.
and they did it just with a simple thing of showing that in this drawer were infinity stones that people use as paperweights. And they were the most prized thing in the universe for the last 20 years. I don't even know how long they've been making these Marvel movies, but
Yeah, it's been a while.
yeah. So but no, so a lot of fun, but a lot of fun. I mean, my bottom line was, it was like, it's a quick hour to get through.
Yeah, I'm excited for next week for sure.
And I see in the notes that you guys watched Cruella, which I haven't seen. What?
Oh yeah, so we did watch Cruella. We actually had to watch it twice because if you watch any movie with kids, it's impossible to watch
Right.
it. But yeah, oh man, Emma Stone's awesome. She really becomes Cruella, and it's cool to watch. I mean, because I've actually watched 101 Dalmatians quite a few times in the past couple of years. So it was just cool to watch, and I would say it's definitely not a kids movie. We watched it with a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I would not recommend actually watching it with a 5-year-old or 4-year-old that are at least a sensitive. Any of them are sensitive.
Yeah, because it seems like dark.
It is a little dark for sure. Yeah. We watched it outside out back at 10 o'clock at night outdoors on our projector, and there was some scary parts for sure. And then we were actually lucky, so not to talk about the movie a little bit, but during this fireworks went off,
Oh,
so we had the family out back, and at 10 o'clock at night, randomly in our neighborhood, somebody lit off fireworks for 15 minutes, like really good, like display aerial fireworks.
oh man.
So we got like an intermission in the middle of our movie, which was really cool. But anyway, Cruella, all in all, I would watch it. I don't know if you were going to pay the $30 to watch it for on Disney or whatever. I mean, wait till it comes out. But yeah, it's cool. Emma Stone's awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of like that Rira movie or whatever, the Raya.
Right.
That that now I can watch it for free, and I haven't watched it, so I'll have to.
Well, I've seen it about 30 times, so
I know that baby loves them dragons, so good time. Well, okay, well, and then we both watched Mayor of Easttown, which I think we both did. Did you watch it all the way through?
I have not watched Mayor of Easttown yet.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
that's something that as an adult person, you can just put that off till whenever you have a break. But
Yeah.
because it's certainly not family fare. But I think you'd like it. It really was a good exploration of somebody who is, I don't know, 5-6 years older than you are right now, and the kind of just like hard life that can lead to. So it's kind of a good meditation on looking at how lucky you are as a person versus how somebody else can experience some bad luck. In this particular, I'm thinking about being a parent.
Oh yeah.
How
Okay.
rough that could be. So
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, it's already rough. No, I'm just kidding. It's not that bad.
yeah, for real. But and before we wrap up, I did want to say that I watched in honor of its 40th anniversary, I watched Raiders of the Lost Ark for the first time in about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years.
Oh, awesome.
It really holds up. There's a reason that kicked off a whole sort of new genre of film, and it's because it's just really well made, and it's got a minimum of, like, when you think about it from the modern kind of heightened sensitivity of like treatment of people and stuff, it's not as bad as it could be, in the sense of it's not super insensitive to others.
Oh, okay, good. Like, so it doesn't, if you watch it now, you're not like cringing like some of the movies you watch.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's not like watching, like I was, yeah, there's certain films where I just look at it and go like, wow, that's just rough.
Yeah, ever since we watched, I would like to watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, because ever since we watched, you told me to watch King Kong.
Oh, yeah.
Every movie I watch, I really focus on the music in the background, and I know the score for Raiders of the Lost Ark is pretty good. I can't remember the guy's name. I'm sure you know it. But he did
John Williams. He's the guy that did Star Wars too.
did Star Wars and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, yeah, and yeah, exactly. Like the most popular one. And so I would like to probably listen to that or watch that again, just so I can kind of check that out, because that's something new I've been trying to watch in movies since I watched King Kong, because that made a huge difference in I'm saying the 1933 King Kong.
Right. Well, and you're right, because you're dealing with a film that it's got so many elements, like the fact that it's a friggin' puppet that they're moving around. That could really pull you out, and that music really drags you in.
Yeah.
And it's funny you say that about Raiders of the Lost Ark, because it was one of those things where like in my head, I've got the I guess they call it the march, so it's a da 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 da, like that's got in my head. But when you watch the film, you start to realize just how well he integrates all of these different themes. And since it's an action driven film, it really does require that the music gets you into what's happening on the screen. And it's great. It is great.
Cool. Awesome.
Sweet. Okay, brother. Well, it's good to see you this week. We got, I guess we'll wrap up with anything you're looking forward to in this coming week.
Well, the next 2 weekends. So next weekend is the US Open for golf and Father's Day. And then the following weekend is my wife's birthday, which we're taking like a 4-day weekend. So that's the kind of stuff I'm looking forward to the next couple weeks. How about you?
Just trying to stay focused on my current goals. That's one of the things, because these are 10-week goals that I'm doing. So
Okay.
The intention, what I learned this last week, was that in the timekeeping, making a good schedule is very different than being able to execute on it. And that's the learning curve part, is that you're doing it's a guesstimate. You're guessing how long something is going to take. And so you get better and better at that the more you do it. So for me, it's really the discipline of my goals is what I'm looking forward to, because I've been such a slacker for the last many months.
Well, good luck on your goals the next couple weeks.
Thanks. Sounds great. All right, pal. Well, good to see you. And I guess this is us as the Philosophy Fools signing off for this week.
All right. We're the Philosophy Fools. Thanks, guys. Talk to you later.
All right. Take care, pal. Bye-bye. Hey, folks. Uncle Greg here. Just wanted to thank you again for listening. Be sure to join us next time when we begin our discussion of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius in earnest. And as always, a special thanks to Ted Onulak and Exit 10 for our music. You can check them out at exit10band.com. That's EXIT10band.com.